You have a platform. You are not plugging in power cords to get things installed. And so I think what we tried to capture with Provisional is that there is work being done in every organization around platforms. It's just it may not be a strategic effort, and that's okay, but we should make that visible.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 253, Deconstructing the Platform Engineering Maturity Model. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farson. Victor, at the top of the year, one of our 2024 things to watch for the year was, again, say it with me, platform engineering.
Oh my.
Were we surprised by that?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, we need something like that. We definitely need it, and companies realize that they need it, and they're still falling for ridiculous solutions, but it's going to continue, and we'll get there sooner or later.
So towards the end of last year, the CNCF published the Platform Engineering Maturity Model. Let's shorten it up to PEM because we can. I'm sure somebody will yell at us for doing it, but we'll see how it goes. We have one of the lead authors from that model, Abby Bangser. Abby, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Okay, how did you get stuck writing this maturity model?
Oh, stuck makes it sound like it was a chore. It was actually an absolute joy. Okay, there was a little bit of chore whenever trying to write something big in an open source collaborative way. But honestly, working with the team, there was 50 different people engaged in reviews and sharing their ideas and helping write this. And for all the value people are telling me they're getting from reading and using this model, the amount of value we got in the working group discussing it was out of control. It was just super valuable and helpful.
And we'll have the link to the landing page for the maturity model down in the episode description so people can check it out. How long did it take to sort of piece this thing together?
There was an initial sort of rough draft of the table as like a talking point that was proposed as a part of the tag or working group meetings in Amsterdam at KubeCon Amsterdam, which is in April of 2023. And from there, we then started really workshopping what would this look like to have it be fully community driven and embody the scope and the breadth and the diversity of the working group. And that then took us through to KubeCon Chicago. So it's about 6 months of sort of deep investment in this, though it came with a little bit of an upfront investment of trying to get the ball moving a bit.
That seems like that was pretty darn fast.
Yeah, the team was awesome. We have fortnightly calls, so we were able to kind of chip away at short things, 15, 20 minutes of discussion on key topics every other week. And then we really had an invested, exciting team. I mean, you talked about platform engineering is here. It's been exciting for a year. It's going to be exciting again in all of 2024. And so people are really seeing value in investing time and thinking about the higher level patterns and what makes it successful or challenging. And so I think, yeah, people pushed it through fairly quickly, but that doesn't take away from how much depth went into it. I mean, we probably had, tens of hours of calls plus asynchronous chat and Slack all, and through Google Docs and things, all doing that review.
Before we get into the depth of that, we must break out the dictionary first. Fortnightly means every 2 weeks. For the uninitiated, yes. Correct? All right, just making
sorry,
sure.
That's the sign that I'm an American who doesn't live in America anymore, and that I find that bi-weekly is too confusing. So
it's too confusing for the Americans, always has been. So I don't understand.
Wait, I'm still confused. Anyway. Why would you twice a week is called fortnight?
No, every 2
Every
weeks.
other week.
Every
2 weeks.
fortnight.
Every 2 weeks.
Okay, I'll need to Google it later.
Every 14 days. Every 14 days. Every 2 weeks.
So 14th
Does the world use
night.
different...
I thought fourth. Okay. Yeah. So sorry, kind of, yeah. 14th
I think that's our
night.
first link in the description of the YouTube of the podcast will be, what does fortnightly mean? I'm sorry I opened that can of worms.
That's okay.
Fair enough.
I don't believe in the... How many episodes have we been now? This is episode 253. In 253 episodes, I cannot remember a time that somebody's used the word fortnightly. That's impressive.
I will take my badge of honor.
I hereby dub you. Okay.
I was sure that we are talking about the game. Honestly, I'm not pretending now. I thought that you were talking about Fortnite game. And now this makes so much more sense because I was imagining some battle royale in a C group or something like that, killing each other and stuff like. Okay, and then you saying that they're all nice, but now I understand completely. It makes sense.
Anyway, I don't know how we're going to recover from that one, and this is staying in. So for everybody listening,
I have to say,
thank you.
I try so hard to like explain acronyms I use and vocabulary and things, and then I come out with fortnightly and it drops like a 2-minute like sideline. I apologize.
That's fine. I mean, if that's the worst that we've got this episode, we're going to be in good shape. So when this was created and released, and again, was it technically released for KubeCon in NA in 2023 or US, however you want to call it?
No, it was in US for Chicago. So yes, in November 2023.
Okay.
Yes.
So it was in alignment with that event.
Correct.
So if you take a look at this, and again, the link's down in the description, at the near very top of the page, there's intended audiences. And we see the classical ones there that we expect, CTOs, VPs, in other words, in theory, the people that have the money. Well, the people that have the budget, they actually don't have the money. Engineering managers, they think they have the money, but they don't. Enterprise architects, are they still using Visio? Platform engineers and platform product managers, these are the people that we really care about. Product vendors and project maintainers, I'll throw that to the side for a moment. Now here's the one that makes no sense to me why they even need to be on the list. Application and product developers. Why do they even care about a platform?
It's a really good question. And do I think that they make up a large percentage of our target audience? No. But if you look at why we think that they might get value from this document, it's about them understanding what's possible and being able to ask the right questions of their organization and of their platform teams. So I think that there are organizations, many organizations, that are operating platforms as service desks. To get access to a test environment, to get access to a new service, to get access to something that you need to do your day job, you put a ticket in to a tracker of some sort, could be ServiceNow, could be Jira, could be anything, and you wait. And you wait an indeterminate amount of time for a team to provide back to you the thing you're dependent on. And I think that it's valuable to have asks of what would be better, what can they expect, what can they hope for. And I think trying to include our users in our discussions will hopefully empower them to share this document with the right people at their organizations who maybe are our more core target audience, and hopefully get both consumers and producers on the same page as to what good looks like.
We now have a new acronym for everybody, in case you're having a drinking game while you're listening today. PASD is what I'm calling it, Platform as a Service Desk. So there we go.
I was like, I didn't think I said any acronyms, but you're right. You came up with that, and that is good. I like it.
I wouldn't say good, but he came up with it, yes.
It evokes the emotion that is some platforms in organizations, I think, quite well.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's probably, I don't have real numbers, but I'd have to say a vast majority. Greater than 50%. And 51 is greater than 50. Is it? I don't know. So anyway, the consumers of the platform, it's a small thing, but should it be a much bigger slice of the pie? Should the clients actually have a voice in what they use?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I think that there's a lot of people in the platform engineering space today saying that platform as a product means that it's optional. means that the internal platform provided by an organization should be something that consumers, being the application developers or other internal end users, should be able to use or not use. And the reality is that's very rarely the case. Because most of the time, if they want to get something, it needs to be past compliance and so forth. And so this is where I think them evolving what is provided to meet their hopes and dreams is where we want to get to.
If it's not optional, if it's mandatory, I cannot imagine a world in which the people creating that platform have real incentives to make it fit people's needs. I cannot imagine a world that's like in outside software engineering. I discovered a company that is doing good service and has a monopoly at the same time.
I agree. It's what makes platform engineering and internal products really hard, because you have to walk the line of meeting compliance requirements for things like GDPR and PCI compliance for credit cards and healthcare requirements if you're in any sort of regulated industries, and yet you have to make your platform optional. I think there are ways to do it. We can talk about some of the ways that I've seen organizations try and do that, truly make their platforms optional, but that is a lot of work. And I guess being really honest, I don't find that a lot of organizations have a truly optional platform by the time a product gets to production. They might in an R&D development environment to a certain extent to try new things, but not to get that thing to production.
But I would go even further. I would say that I haven't seen many companies where users or consumers of platform, in whichever form you have it, are actually happy with it. I think they should be, but I haven't met many of them, right? It's usually, we need to go to our platform. Yeah, let's try to do it in AWS instead, directly, right?
I think it's like oxygen. You don't really hear about the good ones. You don't really hear about it when you can breathe well, but you hear about it when it's tough, when it's low oxygen content or whatever. So I can, I've talked with some people who love their internal platforms, but I will admit, I think that it's less frequent, less easy.
I'm going to go back to the intended audiences again. If your CTO or VP or director of technology, the top item on that list, says we're going to have an optional platform, I would question why they are in that role. Hey, just do what you want. It's all love and rainbows and unicorns right now. That would be, what's the word I'm looking for? Financially stupid to allow for that to happen.
But you can say the same thing for almost anything else, right? And I'm pretty sure that I'm going to stick now needle in you, Darin, but you can say that for any business. Why doesn't government just decide what is the car maker in the US? Or anything else, right? Kind of, if you don't have a competition, if you don't have a choice, I don't think that you can make a good thing, right? And I'm talking about anything. And that just randomly applies to platform engineering, right? If you force people to use something, you will never hear their real feedback, and they will not even give it to you because, hey, that's what I have to use, hence that's what it is, right? In my head, the ideal developer platform, or a part of it, is something that people choose over any other option, right? If you say, hey, it's easier and better for me to spin up a database and observe it and do whatever through this thing instead of doing it myself, right? And that's the value in my head. The people willingly say, it makes no sense for me to do it myself.
Well, I think that you even in that example added not just spinning up a database, but being able to observe it and being able to manage it passively. And so what I think you're touching on is that a user who is given zero constraints may find that they can do the bare minimum or to the best degree that they understand pretty easily using a AWS console and clicking around and getting themselves a database, which is cool. But does that meet the operational and security needs of an organization that is dealing with customer data?
To me, those are separate things, right? I do not think that anybody should allow anybody to do things with zero constraints. We should have rules like, hey, it cannot have vulnerabilities, it cannot have this, or it must have that, and right. But to me, that's not the same bucket as, hey, use this tool to do it like that, right? I've been in companies where teams are actually choosing to self-implement something because what they're getting is bad, and they're still, in both cases, limited to the same constraints, whether they're security constraints or protocol constraints or whatever constraints they are. I'm not saying the alternative, do it yourself, doesn't matter anymore, right? I'm just saying the constraints apply equally, right?
In my experience from just chatting with people and being in organizations and all of that, I would say that the number of teams that are meeting all of the business requirements set on a platform, internal platform, by doing it by themselves is limited. I would say the more common scenario is that a platform needs to enable and manage a number of constraints, but they don't make visible a sort of health check on if the end product is meeting those constraints. So then what the end users are seeing is like, it's just a database, but it takes me 2 weeks to get it. I'm just going to click in the AWS console. Look, it looks the same. They're both databases, and there's no kind of checkpoint. There's no health check that says, I'm going to check every database in my organization, and I'm going to rate it as production worthy or compliant with this standard or whatever. And so when you build in those checkpoints and you build in the visibility of those constraints, all of a sudden when someone goes, I don't want to wait 2 weeks for that database or that test environment, and then you go, that's fine. Here's a automated checklist or even manual checklist of all the things that if you make it yourself, you have to meet. They right off the bat go, 2 weeks is sounding kind of okay. And so now they might actually choose the platform. And now they might actually choose it and complain about it. So they're like, I really don't want to wait 2 weeks, but I don't want to do that either. Can you make 2 weeks better? And now you're starting to start that cycle. So you're making it optional, but you're making visible what you're getting for free by going through the platform route, even if it costs you 2 weeks or some other amount of friction and pain. And then you can choose to say that friction and pain is too great. I am willing to take on the burden of those requirements myself. Leave me alone. But it truly is optional. And that's why I'm just saying I don't see that very often in practice. Not never, but I don't see that very often.
Oh, yeah. I will just, to steer the trouble a bit more, I will say that I've seen people not following those constraints, no matter whether they have a platform or not platform or whatever, right? Kind of show me how many teams really deploy to production without security vulnerabilities. And each of those teams has a mandatory requirement. You cannot be vulnerable. But what you touched is actually, I think that we're on the same page, right? In your example, the team realized, hey, actually, if this is what I need to do, 2 weeks sounds good, right? Compared to what I can do myself. And to me, that's the point, right? You need to get to the point that you say, I could do it myself, but this is better, right? Instead of being forced necessarily to use it.
It might not be great.
Oh, yeah.
But it's better. And to your point, Darren, of like, if someone's in those levels and they're allowing for an optional platform, like, what are they doing? I think you could argue, and this is maybe a bit of devil's advocate coming in here, but you could argue that you're right in the sense that they would be potentially being negligent towards some of their compliance requirements, their FinOps and finance requirements and other things by making things optional. They'd be maybe negligent of the investment in that platform if it wasn't being widely adopted and widely used. But I think also being in those levels and not creating an opportunity for investigation and research and development on things off platform in a safe and reasonable playground way might reduce the feedback loop. So if you don't enable teams to play around with serverless without requiring it to be built in and operationalized as a part of your platform, then maybe you miss out on the use cases for your organization with this new technology. So, but that doesn't mean you take it to production with your production data and your compliance requirements. So how do you build an environment that both encourages, enables, and invests in standardization when and where it's needed, and also encourages and invests in exploration in ways that will encourage the future standardization of your organization? I think that's what those levels of individuals are challenged with.
I'm going to take us back to the intended audiences again, but in a different direction. We're used to hearing the term platform engineers, i.e. shared services people. Let's not get into that debate, but let's assume that's still the same. But the phrase we typically haven't seen or heard is one that you've included in that same family, platform product managers. We're used to having platform engineers and a manager of those platform engineers. That does not equate to somebody that knows how to build a product. How can we help reskill people to become product people?
Do we need to reskill them? We already have people. Company normally has people who are dealing with products, people who are figuring out what customers need, engineers who are implementing those things, testers, and so on and so forth. A company has those things. A better question is, why don't we do not treat that as a product, right? Experience is there. I mean, not necessarily every company, but normally, yes. Because if there isn't experience, then you have a problem that is unrelated with platforms, right? That's a problem that you don't know how to do business, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the point I was going to make, to be honest, is that I see this happening in two ways when it comes to this idea of quote unquote reskilling or providing the capability of product management to your internal platform. I see the reskilling angle, which is saying, take a platform engineer and teach them about how to do product. And I find that really struggles because product is in itself a tangible, hard skill that you need to learn and that you need to study. And not all platform engineers want to go that route. Just like not all engineers want to be engineering managers. And yet being a good people manager takes skill and investment in that domain. So I think it's similar. This is not just something you can kind of like go, oh yeah, I can do that. I'm a smart person. Like you have to invest in it. So the other side of reskilling that I think is important, and this one is where it's tapping in on what you were saying, Victor, is that there are product people in your organization, and if not in your organization, then in the industry, and they can come and do your product for your platform. Where I think that challenge, so I think there's a challenge from both sides, where you get a challenge there is that you get, I mean, I've interviewed these people from my platform team before, and you're like, how would you manage deciding how to implement a feature, like getting kind of uptake on if a new feature should be implemented in one or another way? They're like, well, I would do A/B testing. And I was like, cool. So you're going to A/B test the 100 developers that we have. Okay. And so I think where you get the challenge when you take product people and that are maybe used to web scale kind of products, used to very visual products, is that they have to rethink about how they get feedback from users. So they have, in many ways, the core capabilities that they need. But what they don't maybe have, many would not have experience with, is small and captive audiences. How do you get user feedback from tens, hundreds, or maybe a few thousand people that are a captive audience, and that is the most people you will ever see hit your website, or hit your application? Like that is a different skill set than how do you get feedback on Gmail.
Sorry, I'm still, A/B testing is stuck in my head still, kind of. We're going to deploy variations of a database to production. We're going to A/B test which one works better. Come on.
It was in an interview, and we kept a straight face and challenged the questions and got to some interesting conversations, but it was sort of one of those moments. That's for sure.
One thing you said there is product is a hard skill. Mm-hmm. But also product is a hard skill. It's something that's learned, but it's impossible to implement for most places. Primarily around what you were just saying. Most product people are used to web scale-ish, not just dealing with 10 to 100 people.
I think that we are not used to that when working internally, right? The whole idea that this is going to take a lot of time and we will be failing and people will not want it initially. And then we are going to start changing the direction and tweaking it. And finally, after nobody knows how many iterations and what's or not, we're going to land to something that people really want, right? That's how products work. All three of us work for a software vendor, right? All of us experience that when facing with external users, right? And the whole idea, the notion that we might approach something internal, right? Something that is just for us in the same way, same amount of pain, is often very unwelcome in a way, right? But necessary.
And I think that's where I'm saying, I think that just because we advocate in this paper and you see it around the industry today, the need for platform as a product, it doesn't mean it's a one-size-fits-all implementation of how you build products. Just like it's not a one-size-fits-all implementation of how you build products in industry, right? If you're building dev tooling versus you're building, medical, like internal to a hospital tooling versus like a game for children, like you're going to treat how you do products differently depending on your environment, depending on the elasticity of your domain and your competitors. Like these are all inputs to what are the techniques you choose to employ. But that doesn't mean that the practices, the strategy of product is different across them. But it's what techniques do you employ to try and get like the fastest feedback loop and the best outcomes. And I think that's what's happening here, is that there's not enough experience reports from people who have done this and done this well out in the wild, that people have seen what techniques have applied, that senior and experienced product managers have applied internally, so that I can try and replicate and learn from that.
So taking a look at the model, we've talked about all the intended audiences. I think I've completely bashed them as much as I can right now. Using the model, though, how are people going to weaponize this model within their organization?
Yeah, it's my biggest fear. As a recovering consultant myself, I'm aware of weaponizing maturity models. Yeah, so I can talk about some of the things that we did to try and avoid weaponization. So one of the things that we tried to do to avoid weaponization is we did not just label this 0 to 4 or 1 to 4. We did everything in our power to try and make visual and make obvious that higher is not inherently better. And we did that by naming the levels based on what is possibly necessary for your current organization. So we have the first level is provisional. I can talk about that one, but I'll just leave that for a second. Provisional, it's the starting one. I'll talk about why I'm very excited about that in a minute. But as you try and move up this model, you get operational, scalable, and optimizing. If you are a pre-product market fit organization with a handful of engineers, what the heck are you doing operationalizing your platform before you even know what you're going to sell and if you're going to exist in a year, right? Like, let's talk about what is needed for your organization.
Let me stop you there for just a second.
Yeah.
But I came from Google. This is the way we do things. I came from Meta. This is the way we do things.
Then what are you doing here?
Yep.
Well, that's where a lot of people go, right? They've already made their millions, so now they're just going to go off and do something for a few months.
And that's where people, what you're describing there is the discussion that could be happening internally. And I'm hoping that what this model actually does is, rather than be weaponized, this is actually what can combat that. A person who is there who wasn't at Meta or wasn't at Google, or maybe was but understands the need to build only what is necessary in the moment, can look at this and go, let's talk about the characteristics of an operational platform and the outcomes that you can expect or hope for from an operational level platform. Is that what we need now? Let's talk about that. What would be the indicators that our organization is ready for that? What would be the indicators that we have a certain scale of internal users that require it, and or a certain scale of external, a certain scale and set of expectations from our external users that would require us to meet those operational kind of levels. So I think that might be an example of actually, instead of weaponizing, actually using this to benefit against the weaponization of, well, I did this at this famous organization and therefore it's right always.
I don't understand, why would you have all those labels and stuff if all you really have to do to get the platform is to put Backstage on top of what you have?
You're just trying to stir the pot, Victor. This is what I love about you.
Isn't that what the platform is? Isn't Backstage the platform? The platform?
The one and only if you love writing TypeScript. As as an aside, Victor, you caused this, but as an aside, I think it is absolutely hilarious that we are all writing TypeScript as platform engineers now, after years and years of forcing YAML and Terraform onto application developers who want nothing to do with it and being like, what do you mean? It's just code. Why can't you just write a Terraform module, use a Terraform module, or why can't you just write a Helms values file? It's easy. It's just code. Just learn it. And now all its platform engineers are like, ugh, TypeScript, ugh.
my real beef, really, and the reason why I was mentioning Backstage, not necessarily because of TypeScript, which I dislike as well with all my heart, is that I feel that there is that misconception that that's what it is, that a platform is putting a UI on top of whatever you have, that what I would call maybe service catalog is the same thing as a platform. And then automatically we all live happily ever after, and everybody's super productive and nobody waits for 2 weeks and what's not, right? Unless I live in a different type of bubble, that's what I hear very often, right? You're talking about platform, you're talking about Backstage, right? And I have a feeling that a significant number of people do not yet understand that that's just a tiny, tiny component or part. Necessary, yes, but a very small one.
That's what we try and tackle a bit under interfaces, as that's one of the aspects that you can have at these different levels. I think when you're talking about a service catalog, I think actually service catalog, to be fair, comes in under interfaces and maybe a bit of operations as well, because what that's doing is that's talking about standardizing the access to your platform, which brings with it some value, brings with it some benefits. I think it tries to band-aid over with some self-service solutions. Now, as you say, it might be that the back end is not actually as automated as you want, or it doesn't have as many capabilities as you need. And so I think it's Backstage sort of starts to come in, and their Backstage style portals and UIs and service catalogs start to come in around operational, start to become highly valuable, it's scalable, and then they start to become integrated into the way you work at the optimizing level. But the reason I say it's also around operations is because at that operational level of the operations aspect, yeah, that's a tongue twister, it talks about being centrally tracked. And we talk about at the scalable level, it's centrally enabled. Centrally tracked is at least visibility into what you have, who owns it, what version it's at, what state it's in, these kinds of things. And that is, again, I don't want to diminish the value of these service catalogs, of this visualization of your estate and how valuable that is. Now, I don't believe that that is, as you say, sufficient, even though it is so valuable. And so, unfortunately, right now, they are tightly coupled in a lot of people's minds. But I suspect as people hit the valley of disillusionment, or whatever that's called after the hype cycle, there's going to be a few of those curves and valleys when it comes to platform engineering. I don't believe it's going to be a single trip. I believe that there's going to be aspects of platform engineering that hit valleys of disillusionment before other aspects. And I think portals is going to be one of those that's going to hit it first, where I actually think there'll be backlash as well. People will be negative about them in a way that they don't deserve, because they actually do provide value within the scope of what they provide, but they will not have solved the problems that maybe drew people to platform engineering to begin with. And so therefore people will start to get frustrated by that, and hopefully they will realize that the portal is still worth their investment. They just need to do other work as well.
You started with optimizing, but before you went headlong into optimizing, you said provisional. And it's like, let's come back to that. Now's the time to come back to provisional.
All right, this is the one. So this is another one of my favorite rants. So I will try and keep it short. But I'm a huge fan of the provisional column. So this is the first column and the first level of the maturity model. And one of the conversations we had, I alluded to at the beginning that the conversations in the working group were some of the most powerful learning opportunities for the 50 of us involved, is, well, should there be a you must be this tall before you even reach the maturity model kind of idea? Are there prerequisites to the maturity model? And I was one of the staunch advocates that is not the direction we should go. And the reason I was such a staunch advocate for that is for the same reason that about maybe 10 years ago, I was a part of the group of people that was screaming from the rooftops that everybody had a delivery pipeline. Just some people automated it or codified it as a CI/CD pipeline. I think the same thing's happening today with platform engineering. So 10 years ago, people's delivery pipelines were becoming more automated, right? It was quite common at that point to have CI/CD, but there were still some people whose release processes included walking over to someone's desk and asking them to SCP something or to like manually do something or whatever. And they would say, oh, we need to get CI/CD. Oh, we don't have a delivery pipeline. And I was always an advocate. You have one. You just don't have it codified. So now how do we take that pipeline, we make it visible, and then talk about where the bottlenecks are, talk about where the risks of repeatability are, and let's get those then codified so that we can reduce those risks. Same thing goes for a platform. I don't care if you're a one-person band and you're making your application all by yourself. You have a platform. It just very well might be your laptop and using Brew to install things on your Mac. Or it very well might be a cloud provider and using the console in the web to click around and get what you need access to. You have a platform. You are not plugging in power cords to get things installed. And so I think what we tried to capture with Provisional is that there is work being done in every organization around platforms. It's just it may not be a strategic effort, and that's okay, but we should make that visible.
So we try to make that visible, or we think we're making that visible. Word documents, anyone? But that's not really visible. I like the provisional, and I am in the camp with you on this. There's always something. You always have something.
A big question, which is probably not asked today as much as when I was young, is more, we obviously have something. Now, the question is whether each of us has something or we have some organizational understanding of what that something is, right? Even before any automation or codification or whatever, right? I lived in companies where simply, yes, we definitely had processes. It's just that Joe had his process and I had my process and Michael had his process, right? And it literally depended on who is doing something, right?
Well, you look at the words under each aspect, under provisional, and you see, I'm just going to read the words, not relate them to what aspect they're talking to. Voluntary, temporary, erratic, custom, by request, ad hoc. That's exactly what you're describing, Victor, right? Everything about what you're saying is like, it existed, but it was custom. It existed, but it was temporary or voluntary per person, or it was by request as, across teams and so forth. So you are describing why I'm so passionate about calling attention to the fact that everybody has a platform. My hope for this, we started all this off asking how this can be weaponized. And I guess one of my hopes for another way in which we've tried to mitigate the risk of weaponization, though I believe I will see it weaponized, unfortunately. One of the ways we mitigate it is by putting provisional on here and helping the people on the ground who are stretch Armstronging across the organization to make things work and stitch things together and do things for themselves, talk about the fact that it's happening. Talk to the leaders, their leaders who say, yeah, you're right. Let's get into a room and design a platform so that next year we can invest in building it. You can have those people that are on the ground be like, but we have it now. And we're underwater now because I'm voluntarily managing a service that many teams depend on because I'm the only one who understands it. So help me take this from being voluntary to being invested in and given time and resources for. So optimistic, maybe.
I like what you're saying because one of those things that I have in my head is that a significant part of platforms should be simply acknowledgement of what works and converting that something into something else that is more useful to everybody, right? I would even go as far as to say that we should be leaving to individual efforts or efforts of small groups to figure out this and that, right? Kind of completely almost unrelated with platforms. And then, okay, so we know that this works, right? Okay, this is the database actually that we should be using, right? And it's running in AWS. That's our thing. Now let's convert that into, can I call it a service, let's say, right? That can be consumed and used by many others in the organization, right?
Yeah, I think you're touching on, two patterns, right? So one of the patterns you're touching on is take something that you've already identified as working and sort of try to broaden the impact of that, make that more standard, make that more accessible. And I think that really calls to mind, for me, the idea of that let 1,000 flowers bloom and then rip out 999 of them. And it's the idea that, like, let people explore, let people figure out what works, but then figure out what it looks like to make that something that other people, that becomes a well-trodden path for people, right? And that was, that's a popular blog post that's been around for ages, and I would definitely recommend. The other pattern I think it speaks to is the team topologies pattern, where they talk about the communication, styles of communication, and it's collaboration, facilitation, and X as a service. And I feel like there's so many things in all these models that don't get actually dove into. People just see the cover and then they just don't read the book. And one of the big things about these interaction models, interaction modes, is they don't say that team A collaborates with team B, period. What they say is that interaction modes speak to a evolution of interaction between teams. So if you are in an exploratory phase where you need high empathy and high awareness of problem space and solution options and things, you need collaboration. You need that back and forth to explore what right looks like for both the consumer and producer. It needs to meet the requirements of the business, but it also needs to meet the requirements of the person asking for it. That then needs to be scaled to a certain level. You can facilitate through things like documentation or things like community of practices. And you can start to see if that pattern you collaborated on is actually usable in more than one environment, in more than one use case. And then you can get to X as a service. Then you can get to this automation. Then you can get to this platform. And I think that people seem to look at platform teams and team topologies and go, yes, they provide a service. X is a service. Everything's a service. I need to make a service for everybody. And you're like, but how do you do that without collaborating first? How do you do that without exploring the problem space with your users first? And so I think while you were talking, those both came to mind as really good additional resources that I think speak to the patterns you were talking about.
When you were talking about get everybody in a room a couple of minutes ago, to me, that's optimizing. That's the belief that's in the people's head when they're saying get people in a room. The problem is if you're at a provisional level, what you're doing at that point is you are completely skipping, not going quickly through operational and scalable. And if you're trying to get from provisional to optimizing, you are built on a house of cards. Because if you were to just wipe out those two center columns and try to go from voluntary or temporary straight to enabled ecosystem, give me a break.
Absolutely. And that's where I think you start to find the patterns, the anti-patterns that some people are talking about, like build it and they will come doesn't work, right? I think you start to get those kinds of anti-patterns getting applied when people do try and take those big leaps without first collecting what is currently going on in their environment, understanding that, and then trying to evolve that into something that is more standard and then more kind of self-service and productized and eventually enabled and integrated and all of that.
So you don't just sit around and write white papers all the time, do you? You actually have a day job.
I do. Though now I talk about this white paper so much, it puts it in jeopardy, hey? No, I do. I feel very strongly that these things have to be steeped in hands-on experiences. So absolutely.
So the company that you work for is Syntasso, and there is an open source project available from Syntasso called Kratix. And gee, go figure, it allows you to help build platforms.
What can I say? I'm a broken record.
But it looks pretty interesting because the basis of this is a promise. Are you promising that I will never have to look at any kind of issue tracker again? Is that the promise I can get from this?
Oh, that would be a lovely outcome, wouldn't it? But that it speaks to the ethos of Kratix, which is I, as a maintainer, of Cradix can't promise anything. What I can do is enable the platform engineers to make and keep their promises to their organization. So we feel very strongly that platform engineering requires investment and true engineering effort from an organization, and it needs to be bespoke to that organization at least the highest level, at the interface level. And we want to try and make that easier for them to implement. And so what they want to do for their end users, if they want to give them Jira, they can do that with Cradix. But if they would like to never have to see another ticketing system, they also can do that with Cradix.
When I saw promise, though, I automatically went back to, oh no, we're talking TypeScript again. It's like, oh no, that's not it.
Yes, we hear that a lot. We hear promise theory. We hear promises like, JavaScript. And yeah, there's a lot of things that come to mind.
I think we only scratched the surface of what's in this model. And again, the link's down in the description. It's not a super long paper. It's, if I remember right, 8 to 10 pages in PDF.
About that.
Yeah. Again, it's about the only weaponization you can do is maybe fold some paper airplanes and throw it at people. That's about as far as it can go, I think.
That's the hope.
Sadly, it doesn't go beyond that.
Did you expect a long paper by people who were playing Fortnite?
Oh no, what a callback. Now you've just made it so you can't edit that out.
Well, you just said callback and we've talked TypeScript, so then we're making it even worse with promises. Okay. Anyway, all of Abby's contact information will be down in the episode description as well. If you're anywhere in the platform engineering space, again, at the very top of the page, I don't remember, is the intended audiences also in the PDF? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Should be, yep.
Okay. Take a look at that intended audience. If you do not see yourself in any one of those 6 or 7 different groups, then don't read the paper. Just bail out. But if you do see yourself in that, or the people that are in other parts of that, share it with those people and see where it lands.
That would be great. I would also say that if you enjoy these kinds of conversations and you find any value in discussing this, maybe not even wholesale believing it, but even just discussing it, this is something that is an ongoing piece of work and conversation within the CNCF platforms working group that you can join at any time on the CNCF Slack. And very excitingly, in the upcoming KubeCon EU in Paris, there will be a platform engineering co-located day before the conference starts. So there'll be a half day that will be completely dedicated to talking not about how do you deploy Backstage. Thanks, Victor. But yeah, not dedicated to any tools specifically or implementations, but to what does platform engineering as a discipline that produces a high value internal product look like in different organizations, different scales, different maturity levels. And so it will be really great, and we hope to see you there.
And that's only about 2 weeks away. Can you believe it? It's already time for KubeCon EU again. So Abby, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.